Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this panel on sustainable public procurement and climate mitigation policy. We will have the honor to have 4 very experienced speakers with a broad knowledge on the topic, speaking each 10 minutes. And then we will have 2 really interesting discussants adding their comments on those 4 speakers. So the idea of it is that we get aware of the fact that if we want to go for climate mitigation and to save the world, we don't have to think too much about what climate is about, but what economy is about. So if we want to change the world, then we need to know how trade policy is done, how development aid is done, how investment is done. I'm saying this as a Swiss because of our financial market. And the 4th thing is how supply chain management is done. Supply chain management of enterprises, supply chain management of us all as individuals when buying stuff, and last but not least, the public supply chain management where a lot of money is in. And that's the point we would like to focus on today: public supply chain management, sustainable public procurement. And that's at core. It's one of the 4 great levers to save the world. And this we have to make people understand, because it's considered to be a technocrat matter, public procurement, but it isn't. It is a giant lever to change economy, to make something like a conscious capitalism work. Our first speaker will be Farid Yaker from the United Nations Environment Programme. He is a long-standing, I would call him like a Mr. Public Procurement at the United Nations Environment Programme, and he will speak to us to sustainable public procurement as a mean to limit greenhouse gas emissions and to contribute to the goals of the climate summit. And besides, he will be talking about monitoring success on sustainable public procurement, which is the United Sustainability Goal 12. Farid, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Marc. Thanks for your kind introduction. And I would like also to thank the organizers of the Climate Law and Governance Day for the invitation. We're keen on bringing this subject into the agenda of your day and of the COP26 in general, because we feel it's an important topic, as you said, Marc, to connect sustainable procurement, sustainable public procurement with the climate agenda. Next one. Why do we feel and why we invested in this topic in UNEP? Just a look at the figures. Here you will see what global GDP represents, $84 trillion. Just in the US, you have $20 trillion, or $2 trillion, sorry. And in the rest of the world, it's also astonishing figures. Like you have $27 trillion in the whole world. When you take then public procurement in red, public procurement is also it's maybe between 12 and 13% of GDP, but still this represents really large figures. In the US, it's $1.8 trillion. In the EU, 2.3. The BRICS, it's raising its $5 trillion. So these are huge amounts. And we are monitoring sustainable public procurement. I will present you our 12.71 indicator and we're happy to announce, because we just finished the data collection exercise, that the participating countries, the 40 participating countries in this data collection, account for 2/3 of global GDP, $60 trillion. Next. So I mentioned that the international community now has an indicator which is part of the Sustainable Development Goals, part of Goal 12, and it's the target 12.7. It's about SPP, and the indicator we're measuring is the number of countries that are implementing sustainable public procurement policies and action plans. Next. So we had, as I said, 40 participating countries, and after scoring their performance, we found that the distribution was the following. 7 were deemed to be insufficiently implementing SPP, but then we had 33 that we found compliant with the indicator. 10 of them were at the low level of implementation, but we had 14 at medium-low and 9 in medium-high level of implementation. And as I said, all these countries that participated represent 72% of global GDP. Next. In terms of regional distribution, you wouldn't be surprised to see that Europe is leading. We have 21 countries compliant out of 45, actually 19 compliant out of 44 European countries. Latin America has a lower percentage, but we are encouraged to see that 8 countries participated. In Asia, 6, and we have to work now more on promoting SPP in Middle East and Africa. But we are optimistic because we see many countries now embarking in this continent. In Northern America, of course, the 2 larger countries, Canada and the US, took part and were compliant. Thank you. Next one. Now, why is it important for carbon, you would tell me? One of the sub-indicator we use to measure the performance of countries, the score of the countries, is the existence of SPP purchasing criteria or buying standards or sustainable procurement requirements that are included in the legislation or are used as procurement criteria. And we found that we still have a low level of use of buying standards or purchasing criteria in the international level. Of the 33 countries that were deemed to be compliant, we found that the average was 34% of those countries were using purchasing criteria, with higher figures in Europe and Northern America and lower figures in Latin America. And this means that, for example, low carbon criteria should be among those and are not insufficiently promoted. So there is a gap, there is really margin of progress to insert sustainability criteria in public procurement. Next one. Next. Yeah, here you see in the analysis we did and the reporting, the categories, the product categories that are being prioritized by the reporting countries. And the conclusion here is that the high impact categories are still not prioritized at the right level when it comes to carbon emissions and carbon impact. So you see that we still have like what we call the quick wins or the usual suspects in the first ranking, the highest. Why? Because they are easier to implement, and SPP is still at the beginning of its journey. However, we're optimistic because we see that the high impact categories are emerging. When you look at construction materials and services, it's coming 6th. When you look at buildings, its interior products is there. Road design is included. Building management and maintenance is also high categories, and wastewater infrastructure is low but it's there in the list. So what we're calling for is really to maximize the use of low carbon requirements for those categories. And I think this will help countries to really reduce their carbon footprint. Next one. And here is an example of what we can do using, for example, energy efficient lighting. And my colleague Bruno will come back to that later. So we calculated that in the 156 developing and emerging countries, we have a scenario by 2030 of using energy efficient lighting that will help us save 98 million tons of CO2 annually. So this is really what we mean when we say we have really to encourage energy efficient procurement or low carbon procurement, because we have huge returns of doing that. And this is really the way to go, is use also the demand, not only the supply, to really promote the production and the consumption of these low carbon categories. Next one. So really, what is the way forward? The way forward is to develop low carbon criteria, make them mandatory, because this is the way, and the successful countries are really using, is either you take Asia, where they make direct connection with their own eco labels, or in now the evolving situation in Europe, we have to make those criteria mandatory. And this helps also procurers, because it makes it easier for them from a legal point of view. Then we have to connect to eco labels and develop product-specific SPP guidelines. So the criteria have to be included in product-specific SPP guidelines that have to be disseminated. We have to train also procurers on the use of those guidelines. And you would be interested to see, because there are many legal officers in the room, that we really advocate including these guidelines in secondary legislations. It has to be part of the legal framework to reaffirm the mandatory character of these guidelines, and also to really support and promote green procurement and make it really mainstream in the country and a no choice option. Voila, Judge Steiner. Thank you very much, and I hope I was not too long.
Perfect. Thank you for your Swiss punctuality, Farid.
That's my Swiss ancestors, I have a few of them.
Thank you so much. And
You're
also
welcome.
Thank you for your long-standing commitment to our common topic. But don't be shy. What sounds a little bit technical is, in fact, an urgent call to transform what we have in front of us, kind of a Milton Friedman capitalism, in something like a conscious capitalism. This is a system change, as the climate youth is saying it. And the next person helping us with that system change is Bruno Lafitte. He holds a PhD in plasma physics. He has a past in the French energy management, and now he is also working with UNEP in a special initiative focusing on energy performance. Please, Bruno, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Chair, for this introduction, and thanks a lot for the organizer. This is my last slide, so it will be a short presentation. Maybe the first would be better. Yes. Okay. Thanks. That's great. Yeah. So thanks a lot, Farid, for this introduction, and I appreciate especially the example of lighting, because I'm expert in lighting. This is my first product, and so I really appreciate it. And you're completely right. The amount of savings that we are addressing with sustainable public procurement and with energy efficient lighting and energy efficient equipment quite huge. And when we talk about payback, this is really an efficient way of gaining energy and financing. So here I will talk about the Ufo Initiative. This is belonging to UNEP. This is an initiative for energy efficient lighting, appliances, and equipment. And we will see an example. What can we do for sustainable public procurement? Next slide, please. Yeah. Thanks a lot. So we are at Ufo, United for Efficiency. We are supporting countries, and we roughly estimate that we can save 20% of their electricity by accelerating the global transition to much more energy efficient lighting and appliances. We are working on we are strengthening country capacities around the world. We are dealing and we are care about environmentally sound management practices. I mean, for example, if we are banning CFL, which is containing mercury, CFL are compact fluorescent lamps, which is containing mercury, we care about collecting and recycling that mercury. So we are building synergy amongst stakeholders. We are sharing knowledge and information. We are conducting a lot of workshops in the country with manufacturers in the country, importers and ministries. So we try to bring them together to create a strategic policy and a regulatory framework. And we advise government and addressing technical and quality issues, of course. Our main products are electric motors, light bulbs, refrigerators, room air conditioners, and distribution transformers. Next slide, please. So how do we do? Those 5 products we were talking about are about 50% of the global electricity in the world. So it's quite huge. And this is an estimation of how much can we save for different products. For indoor outdoor lighting, this is 40 to 60%. I will say, with a little bit of experience in tens of countries, I would say 80% is achievable for some countries. So how can we do? We inform policymakers on the interest of an energy efficiency policy. What are the possible savings in terms of finance and energy economic, and we identify the best practices. We try to promote it, and we try also to make example for office building. For an example, public office building with sustainable public procurement, it works very well, and it drives the economy forward. We offer tailored assistance to governments to develop and implement national and regional strategies. For an example, in West Africa or in Latin America, we try to implement and we work at the country level, but also at the regional level to achieve a fast and sustainable market transformation. Next slide, please. So here are bunch of different partners, so I won't read all the logos, but you see we are a public-private let's say contract, and we work with private partners, manufacturers, and industry association a lot. Osram, Signify for lighting, Mabey, and Whirlpool and degree and so on for calling. A lot of manufacturer, but also technical organization and initiative. GIZ, BASE will be, I think, the next speaker, and some also RECRE is a regional initiative for energy efficiency in Africa, SACRI in Asia, and OLADE in Latin America, and so on. With different funders, we have different funders and implementing agencies for UNEP, UNDP, JEF, the GCF, Kigali Cooling Agreement, and so on. So we have a broader view, let's say, but the most important here is to know that we are working together with industry. And why? Because this is a big point. We can make strong regulation and strong minimum energy performance or strong criteria for sustainable public procurement, but you must have products to buy, and people should be able to buy those products. So affordability of products is a key component also of success of sustainable public procurement. Next slide, please. So at Ufo, we are providing quite a lot of tools. We first on the top left, you can see more than 155 country saving assessments. So we have models with regional flows of products, and we have models that tells us what could we achieve as savings for different countries on those 5 products we are addressing, and those country saving assessments are the base for our action. So if we have a lot of savings that are possible in countries, we try to address the savings in those countries and to contact people, or people are contacting us also. We have procurement specifications, guidelines, and financial manuals. So quite useful tools for countries. Also 5 policy guides for the products that we were talking about. We have model regulation guidelines, so countries have just to adapt it and to implement it in the country. Monitoring, verification, and enforcement guides. And also, just before that talk, I was going on the Ufo website. There's still tools that are coming, and one very interesting tool for sustainable public procurement, one Excel tool also that is not mentioned here. Next slide, please. Okay, and more specifically on sustainable public procurement guides, you have 3 guides, 2 guides that are online and 1 guide which is coming very soon on lighting and cooling appliances. So the goal is to address this 12%, I've heard 12 to 20% of GDP in OECD countries, and 30% is more in developing countries. So this is what represents the public sector. Quite huge, and so the series of guidelines that we are producing is to provide set of technical specification. We are working on maps, on levels, on technical standards for countries to develop their requirements. For tendering, it's ready for buying products, good products, and of course, the most efficient products, it means around 20% of the top products. This is one target that we could consider.
Bruno, could you please wind up your argument?
Yeah. We are. So I'm done basically, but what I want to say is there's a huge potential of savings, but what we need to do is to address country by country and to fix the technical parameters that are for tendering for public procurement. So Next slide, please. So this is just for you some links for, I guess you will have the presentation to know more about Ufo, and here you can see some different tools. Next slide, please. So here, picture, we need more energy efficiency to cool the world, and this is a very big topic. Next slide. So I thank you for listening, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Bruno. I'm deeply impressed by the work you have done and UNEP does in general, and in your long-standing commitment. It's really impressive. And what's also, this sounds a little bit technical, but what it's the broader political context of is that huge enterprises advocate and lobby for unlimited discretion when procuring dirty products. That's the truth. And the point is that public sector buying must be clean by definition, because the public sector is not business for business, but for purpose. The public sector buying should be a model to the enterprise buying. And then if we achieve that, we can benchmark enterprise supply chains. That is the final goal of the whole thing. And this might also sound a little bit technical, what Bruno said, what's behind it. It's a huge lever to change the world. I'm pretty convinced that our next speaker will go into this, is Jellie Molino. She is a lawyer and an international expert on sustainable public procurement. She has done, amongst other things, LLM at George Washington University, and she is the one responsible that we have this panel, because she organized the same thing in Madrid, supported by the George Washington University as well at that time. And so you're kind of the mother of this structure, I would say. But you will speak now about the legal frameworks on low carbon public procurement. Please, Jellie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mark. So good afternoon there, and good evening from where I am in the Philippines. So the first two speakers shared to us how sustainable public procurement, more particularly low carbon and energy efficient procurement, can mitigate climate change, with discussion on the status of SPP implementation and examples of some of the best practices and successful efficient procurement projects. For my part, I will be sharing the highlights of the recently concluded UNEP SPP Global Review, more particularly focused on the existing legal frameworks that can support low carbon procurement. Just a disclaimer, though I work as SPP consultant for UNEP, all views that I will be sharing are my personal views based on some of the data from the SPP Global Review. Next slide, please. So what is low carbon procurement? Next, please. So it is actually a process whereby organizations procure goods, services, works, and utilities with a reduced carbon footprint throughout their life cycle. It becomes a low carbon public procurement when the procuring entity is a public institution or any of its instrumentalities. As you can see from the slide, low carbon public procurement is primarily focused on the reduction of carbon footprint throughout the procurement cycle, from the planning to solicitation, contract award, contract management and utilization, until the disposal or the end of the cycle. So in the planning stage, it's important for the procuring entity to actually set its low carbon targets by setting specific carbon reduction thresholds. It is also on this stage when procuring entities may conduct research or market assessment to identify the best available technologies or the low carbon emitting alternatives. Once this is in the procurement plan, it is important to define in the solicitation or tender documents both the low carbon specifications and the award criteria favoring low carbon performance or low carbon solutions. Low carbon contractual clauses are also very important. They can be in the form of key performance indicators, such as reducing transport emission or a requirement for continued improvements. Environmental and social standards, including penalties for non-compliance, are also part of the contractual clauses. In the project closure, you'll see that it is important to assess how the project was able to contribute to the accomplishment of the carbon reduction targets of the procuring entities. It can be done by assessing the targets with the actual result of carbon reduction. Next slide, please. Next, so given the importance of LCPP and the available models by which this can be adopted by procuring entities, the question is, why is low carbon public procurement not the default procurement mechanism for government contracting, more particularly in the procurement of projects that are intended to mitigate climate change? One obvious reason is that public procurement is highly regulated to the point that contracting officials are claiming that they lack legal basis that made it impossible for them to actually implement it. And this is even aggravated by the risk-averse culture of public procurers, brought by the fear of being subjected to potential litigation. Next slide, please. And since, as already mentioned in the beginning, I will use the SPP global reviews that UNEP has been conducted as the basis for discussing the legal frameworks that could help address the legal barriers on the use of low carbon public procurement. So I'm here presenting the two completed SPP global review. The first one was in 2013 and the second one is in 2017. And this year we are almost complete with the SPP global review. The objective of this global review is basically to create a baseline analysis that will examine the evolving field of SPP, which of course includes assessment of the policy frameworks that support sustainable public procurement. In the first global review in 2013, it shows that the policies on SPP in different countries range from the top-down decrees and executive orders to SPP specific national plans, including provisions embedded with the procurement policies and regulations. In most countries that participated in the 2013 global review, public procurement was influenced by national and international legal frameworks, such as, for example, International Labor Organization conventions on social considerations in public procurement, and even multilateral environmental agreements such as the UNF XIII. Also, we observe in that particular review that regional and intergovernmental directives can require and encourage the adoption of SPP. For example, in the European Union, GPP is governed by the EU public procurement directives, which are then transposed to national legislation, and then from which the national legal and regulatory frameworks are adopted, which then lead to the drafting of the SPP action plans or the inclusion of sustainability requirements in the national procurement policies and regulations. Interestingly, the inclusion of sustainability criteria serve as the primordial legal basis for promoting SPP, which of course includes green public procurement or even low carbon public procurement. Next slide, please. In the 2021 SPP Global Review, one of the interesting questions that was asked from the focal person representing the national government agencies in 45 countries was whether their SPP policies or plans have a direct link with the 16 goals or the 17 goals in the 2013 Sustainable Development Agenda. And this slide shows that 40% of the responding national government claimed that their procurement policies are directly linked to SDG 13 on climate action. This slides actually, next slide please. So this particular table shows some of the examples of national policies that promote low carbon public procurement. What you can see from these examples is that a policy can be as broad as the work plan of the Australian government for 2020-22, but it actually includes an immediate implementation of the procurement of emission-free operated vehicles to be used by public authorities, or the National Economic and Social Development Plan of the People's Republic of China, which paved the way for for the creation of what they called as item list for energy saving and environmental labeling products or energy saving products, from which government procurers are actually mandated to refer to this list in buying those products. And some policies, of course, that support LCPP are policies for efficiency and renewable energy. Like, for example, the one in Belgium, which provides a target that 50% of the federal contract should follow sustainable procedure. Or the one from Cyprus, wherein 50% of the public building should be energy efficient building. There is also an example of policy on a solid waste management, such as in Costa Rica, which supports the purchase and use of reusable, recyclable, biodegradable, and recoverable materials. And of course, there are national policies on climate action, such as that of Ireland and Norway, that have been used to require public bodies to include green criteria in public procurement, or the introduction of low to zero emission solutions on the procurement of public vehicles. Next slide, please. So in the 2021 SPP Global Review, it shows that there are 3 types that policies that can actually support low carbon procurement. It can be done through the adoption of national policies, such as those that I discussed in the previous slide, or the inclusion of sustainability consideration in the procurement law or regulations, or the development and implementation of specific action plans and policy. While in the 2017 Global Review, low carbon policy was not specifically identified as one of the national policies that support low carbon public procurement, in the recently conducted Global Review, 16% of the responding national government had identified low carbon policy as a specific policy that can serve as legal basis for supporting low carbon procurement. These policies are adopted either in the
you have a little bit of bad reputation about abusing your time from Madrid.
Okay.
Could you please wind up
Yes,
your argument?
I'm on the last slide. These
Good.
policies are adopted in the form of legislative act, but not necessarily procurement law, executive order, circular, or guidelines. So next slide, please. This is the final slide. So while I can discuss different legislation by which SPP is integrated in procurement and regulation, what I really want to highlight in this session is the important roles of climate change advocates to ensure that in promoting climate legislation, including national policies for mitigating climate change or any legal frameworks that address problem on climate change, please make sure that a provision on the use of low carbon procurement is incorporated. Because while public professionals like us who are here in the panel lobbying for the adoption of secondary legislation for SPP, the contributions of climate change legal practitioners and advocates can really help advance LCP, low carbon procurement, as a default procurement mechanism in government contracting. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jellie, for your contribution. Great as ever. I mean, that I'm fond of your legal argument, it must not come to a surprise to you. But to the audience, I would like to say this sounds all a little bit abstract, but just imagine almost every university in the world is also a public buyer. And if every professor and every student successfully asked his or her university to change policy, to behave as a sustainable buyer, this was really changed the face of the world. We did it in Zurich with the world famous ETHZ, the technical university in Zurich, has now committed to a paradigm shift when acting as a public buyer. So this should be a model for every university in the world. Just by the way, Switzerland had also adopted a new law on public procurement, declaring sustainability as aim and purpose of the law. This is the good moment to introduce to you Julia Salant. She is the head of sustainability innovation at Ecovadis, and she will speak to us about the role of international rating companies when changing the world of supply chain management, be it in the public sector or also in the private. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. what a wonderful session we're having thus far. And I'm absolutely thrilled that I'm able to join you guys. We can go to the next slide, please. And even one more. Now, just before we dive in, just a little bit about Ecovadis. We are a sustainability ratings platform that enables easy exchange, monitoring, and engagement of suppliers on sustainability topics. We bring together to our platform and into our digital network buyers and suppliers from over 200 industries across 160 countries. Our network today has over 85,000 companies, vast majority of which are SMEs that are managing and reporting on their sustainability efforts to their procurement, to their buyers from enterprise side through our platform. On the buyer side, I want to tell you just a little bit about our customer base. We're working with global Fortune 500 companies, as well as smaller enterprises that are starting to adopt sustainable procurement as a foundation for their procurement teams. We're starting to see more and more universities and public procurement use cases starting to use our platform, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're bringing data on sustainability performance of trading partners into the procurement relationship when it matters. For the buying professionals, when they're engaging directly with the suppliers during the annual reviews, during the quarterly reviews, and during contract negotiations and even RFPs. Now we can go to the next slide, please. I wanted to set the stage for the discussion today because we see supply chain as the largest lever for sustainability as well as climate change mitigation. We're seeing that from our network of customers that they're allocating approximately 15% of their spend to be linked specifically to sustainability related topics within these organizations. This really means that there is an opportunity for quite global and meaningful impact all over the world. We can go to the next slide. Now, with that particular mindset, what we're seeing is that we're linking over $1 trillion in spent to sustainability performance, and we're monitoring over time to report back to our procurement teams the positive impacts that this type of relationship can generate. It's really interesting to start seeing this in the context of the global pandemic of the last couple of years, because this really starts to shape and shift the focus of the procurement teams, given the supply shortages that we've experienced in the last couple of years, as well as the disruption that we're starting to experience due to some extreme events that are impacting our supply chains. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I wanted to share with you some insight to set our discussion for today from the latest Sustainable Procurement Barometer that we've published together with Stanford University a couple of months ago. In this research, we've interviewed over 100 chief procurement officers as well as procurement professionals that have which we've discussed a number of different topics, but I want to bring back an interesting shift in priorities that we've observed, that we've been leveraging and building our solutions on over the course of the last 14 years, but now it's becoming more and more clear. We're starting to see that the dimension of focus of procurement on reducing cost, as well as regulatory compliance and and regulatory compliance are staying in the same level of priority. But where we're starting to see grow significantly is the focus of the procurement professionals on sustainability goals of their organizations. Up until this point, we've seen the procurement relationship is really mainly about bringing the supply into the organization in order to feed its business units. Now, today, we're starting to see the dimension of sustainability being layered into this relationship. And one of the reasons why we're seeing this more and more is because we're seeing more sustainability data that is starting to flow between buyers and suppliers through our platform, as well as a lot of other initiatives that are happening right now in the world. So the idea is that we're really, what is really important is that procurement function and chief procurement officers start to take on the role of ultimately cascading their organization's ambition and sustainability requirements into by embedding it into their relationship and thus cascading it into the supply chain. This is a really powerful lever that we've observed, and we're seeing, and we're going to continue seeing more and more of that in the coming years, and with the increased focus on climate change mitigation and sustainability. We can go to the next slide. Now, 2 years ago, our customers came to us saying that they want to start engaging their suppliers in climate action, and not just those who are critical and large organizations, industry leaders that we all know and hear about, but really starting this engagement at scale. This has been brought about by a number of factors that we're seeing as driving this focus from the investors as well as the public demand, but also from the regulators, especially in Europe. So I'm really happy to see some of these regulations emerging and starting to shake business a little bit out of their slumber, because what we're starting to see is that there is building a huge momentum for climate action and engaging suppliers in climate action at scale, especially SMEs all over the world. This is going to be the focus of the procurement professionals for the next few years, while their own organizations are adopting science-based targets. Trying to align their goals with 1.5 degrees Celsius. This means that not only addressing operational efficiencies, which we hear quite a lot about, but also really driving this change through the value chain. Around 80% of corporate emissions are happening within the value chain, and one of the most impactful categories within the value chain is really the suppliers that these businesses are operating with. So this is really this is the trend that we anticipate to remain and continue amplifying as global leaders and consumer-facing brands especially are going to start to have to report on their Scope 3 emissions decrease in the following year. This will in the following years. This will not be possible without actually collecting data from supply chain, benchmarking performance, and starting to monitor it over time to show a decrease in improvement. We can go to the next slide. So with all of that in mind, I also wanted to bring just a little bit of data from our database. In the last year, we took a look at how SMEs are actually, how suppliers, and a majority of which are SMEs in our network, are performing. And we looked at reporting on the GHG emissions as as a proxy ultimately for maturity in managing GHG emissions and in managing and the potential for improvement. What we saw is that the vast majority of the companies in our network have not even started this disclosing their GHG emissions. We've surveyed these
Julia,
organizations.
could you please rewind your argument and
Yes.
especially please repeat the thing with the benchmarking. This was particularly important.
Of course.
One last sentence, please.
Of course, no problem. I'll rewind. What I was saying is that global leaders and organizations that are committing to science-based targets will have to report their performance towards and the movement towards their targets. This is not going to be possible to do without actually collecting data from the suppliers, benchmarking their performance, and ultimately showing the performance improvement year over year.
Thank you so much, Julia. I couldn't agree more. And what I can tell you is that the Swiss Railway Public Buying Division, meanwhile, gives extra points to bidders offering more transparency in their supply chain. So they get rewarded in the award phase for offering more transparency than the others. So this is the moment where we arrive to offer the floor to our discussants with begging them to be really short and succinct is just Jacobs. Josh, you are working in the consultancy helping sustainability managers to refine the methods when doing the job. I'm really curious what you have to say to what you have heard from our speakers. Please, Josh.
Thanks, Marc. So the great part of this is I was just asked to be a skeptic. Normally, we all love that job because you get to come up and poke holes in other people's arguments, right? But my job here today is I'm going to be a positive skeptic, okay? And if you look at my things, I look like an extra in Beautiful Minds here. So I'm going to roll through very quickly, Marc, for us. I'm not going to ask questions. I'm going to set a challenge here for everyone in the room and for those that were specifically speaking. My friend Farid, who has been around the world and done so much for all of us on sustainable procurement, was disappointed that there wasn't more SPPs out there in focus. But those that are out there have lots of operational carbon in them. One of the greatest sustainable programs in the world was Energy Star. It's purely built on operational carbon. Buying criteria for true carbon is not really utilized in the marketplace. What do I mean by true carbon? Operational is only half the answer. How much embodied carbon is in the products that are saving you all this energy? Bruno, it's awesome that you want to save countries 20% of their electricity, which is saving carbon. You're cutting 98 million tons of operational carbon. But are you actually saving carbon? How much carbon was used to make those things that saved you the 98 million tons? Some of those manufacturers you talked with, I work with to measure their embodied carbon, right? Jellie, you talked about it, you spoke about it in saying that low or zero emission solutions are out there, but they're not low or zero if the factories that they're built in are powered by coal or gas, right? It's great, you're saving no emissions from the car, great, but how is it made? So finally, to get to this, we have to recognize that buying things is by definition not environmentally friendly. I'm not sitting in a sustainable procurement session and telling people not to buy. In fact, it's our largest thing, as everyone's pointed out with data, to move the market. What I'm saying is buy and look at the whole picture. Look at the entire picture.
Thank you so much.
True carbon information. Jellie said it, set the goals. Okay.
We have to go for a more holistic approach, don't you?
Last point, Marc. Net zero can't be true zero if you don't look at embodied carbon. Set the goals like they're talking about.
Great point. So what you're advocating is a more holistic approach, including the very big picture, isn't it? Great, I couldn't agree more. So our next discussant is Natalia Spătaru. She's a young researcher on the topic, and I particularly appreciate that Jellie gives her the floor like she has been given the floor some years ago. So you're kind of leading the tradition of fostering young researchers, and here is the beneficiary of that strategy. Natalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you, oh, it's on. Okay, great. I thought I didn't turn it on. Thank you, Jellie, for appointing me as your successor. Glad to receive this post. So I have some mentions, some points regarding the presentations that were made. I'll start with the presentation of Farid, as he fairly mentioned the fact, well, he spoke about the money and about the big power of the purchasing authorities. And I'd like just to underline here two aspects about the importance of public procurement. Well, first, and I noticed that was discussed a lot about the first aspect, which is about buying environmentally friendly goods, services, and products. However, I'd also like to mention that green public procurement or sustainable public procurement has another fundamental role, and it's shaping markets and spurring innovation. And how will this occur? Well, by creating social corporate responsibility. I mean, if a contract authority sets as binding obligations for corporations to abide to public sustainable public procurement rules, this will also influence the business sector and will make them respect the environmental standards that were adopted by the UN 2030 agenda and also other standards. The OECD.
Perfect, Natalia, that's it. Thank you so much. So what you're saying, if we don't even get clean supply chains in the public sector, we will never get clean supply chains in the private sector. And that's why public sector should act as a role model. And I couldn't agree more. I'm now really pressed to finish this session because we are already a little bit delayed. I'm sorry to be a little bit harsh to everyone, but it's due to the secret messages I get from the organizer. I thank you all. I have been thrilled to see the density of your messages. And to the audience, I would say, if you neglect public procurement as a lever to go for a new climate policy approach, you will not be successful. There is no Green New Deal. There is no Build Back Better. There is no green recovery without sustainable public procurement. And with these words, I'm closing our panel, thanking all speakers and discussants for their wonderful contributions. And bye to everyone. Have a wonderful continuation of this thrilling event. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good job. Bye, everyone.